Safety was becoming a growing concern for NASCAR, and 1953 would be a pivotal year in that area. There had been few fatalities in Grand National racing, but as the speeds increased, the stock cars were having trouble holding up to the punishment. So, with the blessing of NASCAR, the factories began providing severe usage kits to bolster the cars. NASCAR also issued a series of bulletins asking drivers to pay better attention to safety belts and the seat. Roll bars were also encouraged for the first time. It was the start of what would become some of the safest racing in the world today. On the track, Herb Thomas dominated the 1953 Grand National Series. Driving a Hudson Hornet, Thomas set a NASCAR record by winning 12 of 37 races and ran away with the title, beating Lee Petty by 646 points. Thomas was a quiet farmer from North Carolina and was one of the best of his day on the circuit.
He was a very smooth race driver, but when he needed to be aggressive, he could be. But what Herb was really known for was Herb and his Hudson Hornets. And the Hudson, what put Hudson out of business is they were so far ahead of their time with the engineering on those cars. And that's why they made great stock cars, because Herb, you put Herb in a Hudson, watch out.
Thomas drove a Hudson to the title in '53, but wasn't the only one who found success with the Hornet. Hudson ruled the Grand National Series that year by winning 22 of 37 races, including a stretch of 16 out of 20. The Hornet's success came from its inherent design.
Back in them days, the dealer would let you drive anything that he had. So when the new cars come out, we'd go drive all the cars and then decide which one we wanted to make a race car out of. So you drive the Olds and the Ford and the Lincoln and the Hudson and so forth, and the Hudson seemed to have the most potential.
So what made those Hudson Hornets work so great is that they had a floor pan that went down underneath the chassis, and so it made the center of gravity of the car go down. The driver was sitting lower to the deal. And then it had an engine that literally never ran cool all the time. It was the best cooling engine we've ever seen.
You could go on a turn with the Hudson Hornet, turning like 5,800 RPMs, and you come off on the backstretch and you still turning 5,800 RPMs. But with the Oldsmobile 88, you get there and it would start sliding, and you'd probably lose 1,500 RPMs. And that's why the Hudson won races. It would outhandle the other cars in the turn.
As the season began in 1954, it was business as usual on the Grand National Circuit. Herb Thomas won the season opener at West Palm Beach, and Tim Flock easily bested the 62-car field at Daytona. It looked like a great points battle was already shaping up, but after the Daytona race, Tim Flock was disqualified for a carburetor violation, and Lee Petty was declared the winner. Incensed by the ruling, Flock quit the circuit and went back to Atlanta to run his gas station. With Tim Flock gone, the door was wide open for Thomas to become the first three-time champion. Thomas steered his Hornet to 12 victories, including the Southern 500. In 1953 and 54, Herb Thomas had remarkable years, winning 24 of 71 races for a .338 winning percentage. But as gaudy as his stats were, Thomas did not win the 1954 Grand National title. That honor belonged to Lee Petty. The Level Cross, North Carolina native won 7 races, 5 less than Thomas, but was running at the end of all but 2 contests. Petty had won by finishing consistently in his Dodge. Owning and operating his own cars, Petty was known as a good mechanic and a family man on the circuit.
He didn't start driving until he was 35 years old. That's what's so incredible about Lee Petty. And also, he was a smart, cunning, consistent race driver, and he knew how to get the most out of the car, but also when to slow down and not abuse the car.
Lee was a kind of a sneaking driver. He was good, but if he could run over you, he'd do that and say, "Excuse me," you know. And I remember we was on a talk show in Greensboro there once, and he was talking about Richard got his clean driving from him, and I said, "Hell, Lee, you got to remember who you're talking to. This is Buck Baker. You'd run over a guy if you got a chance and then say, 'Excuse me.'"
Petty was a smart, patient racer who usually let others wear themselves out battling up front while he drove to give himself a chance to win at the end. NASCAR had shown a good deal of concern toward making their race cars safer in the last few years, but the issue would come to a head in 1955. Several tragic accidents, including the death of two-time Indy champion Bill Vukovich and a fiery crash that killed 82 spectators in Le Mans, had some calling for an end to racing. The turmoil would eventually cause AAA to withdraw from sanctioning the IndyCar circuit. But NASCAR and Bill France stood tall and weathered the storm. Citing NASCAR's attention to safety, France issued this statement: NASCAR's reputation has been built on a solid foundation and is continuing to improve safety and sportsmanship on the speedways of America. Cooler heads prevailed and racing continued to grow in popularity. The manufacturers became more involved than ever, confident that victories on Sunday translated into sales on Monday. Chevrolet and Ford poured huge sums of money into NASCAR teams and backed their cars' achievements with national ad campaigns. However, Chrysler would be the big winner in 1955 without spending much money at all. Wisconsin native Carl Kiekhaefer entered the NASCAR scene with the millions of dollars he had made selling his Mercury outboards. Fielding new Chrysler 300s, Kiekhaefer took the plunge into Grand National racing with one purpose: to sell outboard motors. Although it seemed he came from nowhere, Kiekhaefer dominated the circuit for 2 years. In 1955, Kiekhaefer arrived in Daytona ready to race with a fleet of new cars but no driver. It didn't take him long to find a good one.
I had won the 54 race, and Bill France Sr. had disqualified the car and NASCAR. And like I said, it was in February, and I went back to Atlanta and bought a filling station, like starved to death all year long. And a bunch of my buddies said, the race is coming up, you know, the following February, and kept wanting me to go. And I said, I can't leave the station, you know. And finally, they talked me into going. And we went down, we standing on the beach, drinking beer and enjoying ourselves. And this Chrysler, a big white Chrysler 300 came by. And the good Lord must have been listening to me, because I said, boy, if I had that car, I'd win this race again this year. And Tommy Haygood, a Mercury outboard dealer from Orlando, Florida, was standing about 3 foot from me. He says, what's your name? I said, Tim Flock. He says, I'm one of the dealers for Mr. Carl Kiekhaefer, the Mercury millionaire, and he don't have a driver for that car. Would you like to meet him? I said, man, yeah. And Tommy Haygood put me in a little Mercury outboard truck and drove me over after the Chrysler left the beach. Went over there, and Mr. Kiekhaefer had a brand new filling station. Here's 8 guys with white uniforms on working on that same car. And finally, I got to shake his hand, and he said, get in the car and sit down. I knew that I was going to be my car, because he's going to adjust the seat.
Tim Flock won the Daytona Beach Road Race that year, but only after Fireball Roberts had been disqualified during a post-race inspection. An ironic turn for Tim Flock, since he had been stripped of a victory in this same race a year earlier. What's even more amazing about the victory is that Flock did it with an automatic transmission.
And I said, man, there's no way you can win Daytona with an automatic transmission. Do you want to drive the car, Flock? I said, yes, I do. But coming off those turns up that backstretch on the north turn, it's kind of uphill, and everybody else had straight transmission, including Fireball Roberts. Coming off that north turn, Fireball and I was running side by side, and I jerked that car down in low, you know, and Fireball was in second. He pulled me 2 blocks going up that backstretch, and then I'd knock it up in drive, and it'd finally get going, and I'd almost catch him in that big old Hemi engine at the end of the south turn. But that's the way we run all day long. I never could get up by him.
Tim Flock and Carl Kiekhaefer went on to have one of the greatest years in NASCAR history in 1955. In the 40 races he entered, Flock won 18 poles and rang up 18 victories, feats that were thought to be unbreakable at the time. Additionally, Tim led every lap in 11 different races. At mid-season, Tim was joined on the Kiekhaefer team by brother Fonty, who won 4 races in his Chrysler 300. The Flocks also finished first and second 4 times in 1955. Kiekhaefer's success was not luck. His racing program was very professional and well-planned.
He was a fanatic, for one thing, a total, complete perfectionist, number 2.
Carl Kiekhaefer was a very intense competitor. I don't know of anybody that's competed up to that point, and very few since that would compete with the intensity that he did. He wanted to win. Everybody wants to win, but he would absolutely go crazy when he didn't win.
He did things back then that were so scientific that they're not even up to it today. and we'd take a reading just like you'd make out a log, you know, the gear ratio and what jets you was running in the carburetor, what rear end ratio you were running, and what tire size, and then when you went back to the racetrack, if you had won or did pretty good, then you just pull out your little black book and go back to the same thing.
Carl Kiekhaefer was a generous man to his employees. Wanting only the trophies and advertising for his outboard motors, Kiekhaefer gave all the prize money to his drivers, who were already making up to $40,000 a year from him. But that didn't mean he was easy to work for.
Boy, he meant business. In fact, he'd go to Daytona later on after we got a bunch of cars running. He'd run a whole motel and get in the middle, put all the drivers on one side and all the wives, and guaranteed nobody was going to go around their wife or girlfriends the night before any race that you're going to run with his cars. And blow a whistle every morning at 6 o'clock. We had to get up. And he had rented an abandoned military airport right outside of Daytona, and we would run those Chrysler 300s all day, just run us till 6 o'clock at night. But when that race started a week later, those cars were ready to win. That's why we won so much.
Even though Tim Flock had the best ride on the Grand National Circuit in 1955, he did not assume the points lead until the 33rd race. Defending champ Lee Petty, also in a Chrysler 300, used his trademark consistency to stay atop the standings most of the season. But once Tim Flock overtook Petty, the rout was on. Flock would win the 1955 Grand National Championship by more than 1,500 points to join Herb Thomas as a two-time champ. About the only big race Kiekhaefer's Chryslers didn't win in 1955 was the Southern 500, where Herb Thomas completed the comeback story of the year by winning his third Labor Day Classic. Thomas had been hurt badly in a wreck at Charlotte that May, but came back to win 3 races driving his Smoky Unit-prepared Chevy.
Flag for his third victory in the Southern 500.
Kiekhaefer's team made an unbelievable impact in his first year on the Grand National Circuit by winning 22 of 40 races. But that wasn't enough. Kiekhaefer wanted to dominate stock car racing like he did the outboard motor business. So he bolstered his already solid stable of drivers with veteran Buck Baker. Baker had beaten Mr. K's Chryslers a couple of times in '55, so Kiekhaefer figured if you can't beat them, hire them. Kiekhaefer's cars had already won 3 of the first 5 races in 1956 when his team arrived in Daytona that February with 6 cars. It was business as usual for Mr. K's teams. Tim Flock captured the pole with a speed of 135 miles an hour and would start at the head of the 72-car field. Flock then cruised to a 57-second victory in a race that was called because of the incoming tide. The race had a couple of spectacular accidents.
It's Russ Truelove clipping at top speed as he nears the end of a 2-mile straightaway. His trouble started when he drifted out of the groove onto the soft sand.
Including one Ralph Moody, who flipped his new Ford, but managed to land on the wheels, keep racing, and finish third.
It's a good thing for Ralph Moody in number 12 that the sand is soft. Tim Flock.
Loaded for bear, Kiekhaefer's Chryslers went on to a record-setting tear that spring. Starting on March 25th, Kiekhaefer cars won a record 16 consecutive Grand National races, a record that may never be broken. That streak is even more amazing when you consider that Tim Flock quit Kiekhaefer after winning the North Wilkesboro race in April. Flock needed a break from the pressure.
He was so tough on us, it really gave me an ulcer, and I had a bad. I went down to 130 pounds racing for Kiekhaefer.